It's all about chinuch. So last week we got caught up in the introduction of the Sefer. I didn't really properly introduce this parak. The way this is written is, it's first a conversation with the parents and the malamdim, and this all the critical insight. Not all, I shouldn't say all, but a lot of the critical insight into the Rebbe's approach we're going to see in this, and it actually. It should be mandatory reading of anybody who goes into chinuch, at least this opening paragraph. So we'll start again. We only did one paragraph. So we said Shlomo HaMelech Amar b'Mishlei. Shlomo HaMelech. I also mentioned Mishon just before you walked in that the Rebbe he asked in his letter to his brother that was sent after the war. He asked that people disseminate his svarim. So it's an important thing to also one thing we'll point out a lot in the Sefer, even though it's written as a guidebook for children and to parents, everything applies to everybody. You know, a person who's 40 is still a child compared to 50. But it's relevant. The Iker Chinuch, and we'll see that this is the Rebbe's whole mahalach, is that the Iker Chinuch is for ourselves. Is the person who's most in charge of the Chinuch is the child himself or the person themselves. So we'll see that. Shlomo HaMelech Amar Mishlei. Shlomo HaMelech says in Mishlei, Chanoich l'nar al pi darkoi. We'll see what the word chanoich means, but the way we typically translate it, educate a child according to his way. Gam ki yaskin, so that also when he gets older, lo yasser menu, he will not veer from it. Zeu ikra chinuch. This is the primary purpose of chinuch. Shloi bilvad b'shosh hanar nar. Not just when the child is a child. The yad aviv oida tekif alav, and his father is still in control of him. Yishmala, that he'll listen to him, v'yask mitzvah. Right? There's no big shtick for a father to control his 3-year-old. You threaten to not to give them candy. You threaten to smack them, whatever, depending on where and when, what time in history. But it's easy for a father to control his child that's still dependent on the father. The Yasik mitzvah, and do as he says. But when he gets older and he'll be in his own rishus, the point is, we want to make sure that then, when he's no longer under his father's control, that he will still follow in the path that was set out for him. He says, and this we started with last week, but chinuch is not just commanding. Do this and this. Put on tefillin, take a little of an esrog. It's also not just getting accustomed to something, habituating somebody to do something. That we get him into the habit of doing good things. As the Rebbe will say, those are both very important tools. Right? It would be very hard if a person every morning woke up and said, should I go to shul today? Should I not go to shul? It's a very important part. One of the tools is that you're in the mood. You're accustomed. You're used to going to shul every day. It makes it a lot easier. So there's certainly tools, but that can't be the entirety of chinuch. What's even more important than commanding and accustoming one to do this is a chinuch. They're just tools that we must use. The mechanech must use in order to train him in Hashem's ways. But what is chinuch is what the Rebbe wants to get to. So he says, "Ki mashmos hamilah chinuch." The word chinuch. How do we know what the word chinuch means? Aside from the fact the way we've used it, where do we really see? So one of the tricks, I think it's very famous in Rav Tzadok, but one of the tricks that you have in a lot of the svarim is we go to the first times that they're used in Tanakh, in the Mefarshim, and we see how they were used originally before common usage might have gotten in the way. So Himashmas Hamila Chinuch, he says, I have a very good place to tell you where we learn what Chinuch means. Mefarish Barashi's al Aposik Bona Bayis V'Lo Chanachai. The halacha is that certain people were exempt from the army. One of them was somebody who built a house but had not yet been mechanech the house. Okay, so we see we see it in Tanakh, the word mechanech Chinuch lashon haschala. So we see over there that what's the pasuk envisioning? What's Rashi saying? Somebody built a house and he has not yet begun to use it. Okay, so that's one hint. It doesn't give us the picture yet. Now, just because over there it means the beginning of using a house, that doesn't mean that any time you would say beginning, you would use the word chinuch. As he'll show us now, right? By the Haggadah, we have this concept that we start off with the things that are more derogatory in our history. We're on the bottom paragraph of the first page. We start off with the things that are derogatory, and then we build up to the things that are more praiseworthy about the Jewish people, right? We would not say Hamuska B'Talim B'Kesh Lo say the Haggadah Pesach that we talk about by the Haggadah Lo Yomer Ro Mechanech B'Gnos. it would be improper Hebrew usage to say mechanech bignus, even though we just said mechanech means a beginning, some sort of a beginning, but that's not the right usage of it. V'chein eitzel Sanhedrin. Also by the Sanhedrin, the halacha was by the Sanhedrin that when they would poll the Sanhedrin to hear their psak, right, you needed a rive, so you had to poll them. You would start from one side and you would finish on the other side. You couldn't jump around. You can't skip around by the Sanhedrin and pick different people. You have to start from one side and go the other way. Again, you would maschilim min atzad. The Gemara over there says that you begin at the side. Lo yomru mechanchin min atzad. We would not say that one is mechanech from the side, even though we said that mechanech means maskil. Aval Parshas Lech Lecha, we have more of an indication of what this means. And Farish Rashi Lanu Yoisa, Rashi explains it more. Over there it says that Avram, when he went to go out to war, he took his chanichav, which is from a lashon of chinuch, right? Which we typically translate his house, the young men of his household, right? He had students, he had servants. So Rashi says over there, chanichav shechanochoi lemitzvos. He educated them, he was mechanech them in mitzvahs. It is the beginning of a person to learn some kind of a skill or a keli to be used for its purpose. And he explains this more. Where do we see lashon of chanoich? We see it by a child. We mechanech a child. Chanukas hamizbeach, the inauguration of the mizbeach. Chanukas habayis ad kan l'shana. That's Rashi. Now, if let's say I have a tailor, he's a professional tailor, and he's going to begin to sew a suit for me. I'm not going to use the word chinuch again. I'm not using the word chinuch for that. If he already knows how to be a tailor, we don't use the word chinuch. A house, if we're beginning to build it, they're laying a foundation of the house. When do we use chanoich? Let's say for the tailor, when he begins tailoring school. Right? When he goes to medical school, we would call that's the chinuch of a doctor. When he goes to law school, that's the chinuch of a lawyer. That's the beginning of being trained for it. Once he's trained, it's no longer a lashon of chinuch.
That's usually in the beginning.
The beginning, but for a purpose, not just stam beginning. He's going to explain more about after I've built a house and now I'm moving into it, I'm going to begin to use it for its ultimate purpose. Then we would call that a chanukas habayis. Rashi says not only is it a beginning, but it's a beginning that's going to lead to its ultimate purpose. So therefore it's not on the umnus or the malacha, it's not on the talent, the skills, or the malacha, it's about the person. Rak ala adam. To borrow a term from Brisk, it's not the cheftza, it's the gavra, right? When the person is when I start to use my house differently, when I start to train myself for a certain career, that's called chinuch. Okay? So now he wants to explain what is that, why is that. Very nice. We split some hairs, we made a distinction. What does that have to do with anything? So he says, what we're doing is chinuch means we're preparing the innate talents that a person has within inside of him that have to be brought out. Right? A person, the day a child is born, when a person who is going to grow up and to be a skilled anything, he's going to be a skilled orator. He has that talent in him when he's a baby. It's just that it's going to take many years till we bring that talent out. It has to be developed. It has to be nurtured. But there's a certain innate talent. Somebody who's a musical prodigy, he has that ability the day he's born. It's just going to take us a few years till we can reveal that. So he says that's what chinuch means. We're preparing this innate ability to come out, to shine, to sprout. And the same thing, when do you start to see the benefit of the house? Is when you're going to start to use it. You're going to start to get accustomed to what rooms I'm going to use for what, how I'm going to set up the house. That's when you're really starting to bring out its potential. Neufel loshen chinuch. There we use the word chinuch. Tevel atzmi hi teves chinuch. V'nemra aloitzos hachshara shebodam beklim and hakoyach lapoils. When we take something out, we begin the process of taking out the potential into actualization. We use the word chinuch. If we wouldn't take it out, there have probably been in history many people who would have been musical geniuses, but they just were never trained, or they never realized it, or nobody ever helped them bring it out. So therefore, they were still as naturally talented as the people as Mozart and Beethoven, but nobody knew who they were. It wasn't brought out. Nobody helped them develop it. We have to bring it out and to train the person. Right, so this is the preparation of it shining. When we say this about raising children, we're talking about developing and opening up his nature, his potential, that right now is found in a very constricted way, or just in potential and hidden, and we want to reveal it. And since every Jewish child, every Jewish person, the minute they're born, there's a neshama that includes a piece of godliness inside of them. It's hidden and it's buried. But right away, when a Jewish child is born, they're filled with this light of Hashem. We have to train it to bring it out, to reveal it, and to let it sprout. And then he can become a true Jew who serves Hashem. He will desire Torah on his own. In other words, you start to see a little bit of the indication. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but what the Rebbe's goal is we're not trying to force a person into something. We're trying to bring out the natural talents. Well, what he's saying is that when you're mechanech a child right, you're not forcing anything. You're bringing out where his neshama wants to go. We're opening up passageways for his neshama to go according to its natural path. When we darkoi, gam ki yaskin lo yaser. Then when he gets older, he's not going to veer from it, because when the neshama is doing what it wants to do, what it's supposed to do, it's not looking for anything else. It's only when a neshama feels forced. If all you remember is that your rebbeim, and I'm not saying about Chas V'Shalom any rebbeim that anybody here in this room had, but if you remember your rebbeim, if you didn't have your finger on the place, they slapped you with a ruler, then of course the minute you're 21 and your father is not paying your bills anymore, you run. You can't wait to get away from it, because you have these awful memories. But if a rebbe was opening up your neshama and leading your neshama to its natural course, you don't want to leave. You'll take more opportunities to try to develop the neshama when you're on your own. Whenever that moment comes that you're free, so to speak. If you're on the right path, you'll continue to go on that path, right? Therefore, going back to his original thought, one who just commands his children or his Talmidim, or just gets them accustomed to doing certain things, you cannot be sure that the child will stick with it when he gets older. He might. Maybe something will have clicked within him, but you can't be sure if it's not him that's pushing this process. Then at a point where the outside influence is no longer in control, there's nothing to guarantee that he'll continue along this way. Therefore, Shlomo Melech said, train the child, educate the child, techanchoi, meaning in this way, open up his potential. El kirboy tachter, you should penetrate into his essence. That's kedusha Yisrael shaboy behelim, and this kedusha, this Jewish kedusha that's hiding inside of him, to gala reveal it. Rak oz, only them gam ki yaske lo yosmenu. Then you can be sure that he's not going to run away from it. So he says, we have a little bit more time, right? Shlomo Melech lo yas hatach es tachlis hachinuch b'vad hadyanu. So that was the purpose of chinuch, right? We just set out, according to Shlomo Melech, that was the purpose of chinuch. But Shlomo Melech, we know, was very smart. He didn't just tell us the purpose. He also told us, the Rebbe says, how to do it. Not just what to do, but how to do it. The long-term goal is that we want this 5-year-old in front of us to be a wonderful 45-year-old burning for Hashem in 40 years from now from what we're doing with him today when he's 5. That's the goal. How? How do we do that? So he says, he shows us also the way, the methodology. How do we go about doing this? He gave it to us in the same words. Where is that? That's the beginning of the pasuk. Chanoich lenar al pi darka. You have to train each child according to his own way. Shezehi ha'ikar, which is the main thing. If you have somebody who just commands and instructs and gets people used to certain things, he doesn't have to put his heart into the child, into the student. Right? As a matter of fact, in university systems all across the world, you could fill up a huge stadium with 500 students. The professor doesn't have to know a single one of them. He never has to have a one-on-one conversation with a single one of them. He instructs. He shares his wisdom. He's not connecting at all to the individual students' neshamas. Their neshamas are irrelevant to him. He has wisdom that he's sharing, and that's it. And in general, in most areas of higher education, certainly and probably in most elementary and high school settings also, that tends to be the system. I have a class that's way too big to connect to anyway, and therefore I just instruct, and hopefully I make an impression on them, but I don't have to connect individually to the students. Olav rak letzabos, I say kach v'kach, right? I can get up and I can give a shiur, do this is the law, you have to do this, you have to follow this. V'dailoi. Gam ene margish choiv batzma. He feels, this professor, by the way, goes home, goes to sleep, and he sleeps very well. He feels no obligation l'tapa b'chol talmid v'talmid b'nei atzma, to deal with each student individually. Yuchol hu l'tzavish l'harbe talmidim b'nei gil echad sivu echad. He could fill up a room of 500 12-year-olds and tell them what's appropriate for a 12-year-old to know. Asu kach v'kach kiloi b'talmid reven. It doesn't depend on the student. Rak boy, it depends on the teacher. Mitzava levad. Hadavar Toli. Hu Yitzava v'zois kol pulasa. His job is just to share what's in his mind. He does not. It doesn't have to be a two-way street. It doesn't have to be. It only has to be a flow down. But if a true mechanech who really wants to open up this child's neshama, Hatmunu v'agnuza, by that's hidden him, legadlu lahavira shetivar be'eshel maila. He wants to set it on fire with a fire from above. Lamarim v'kadosh v'kulei avkoiches gufa b'kdushi yiskadlu teres Hashem yishtoiku. He wants this child to long for being close to Hashem. He wants there to be a real feeling, not just to go through motions. Mukhrachu laharkenes atzmi laTalmud. He has to bend down to the Talmud. He has to lower himself to the Talmud. Hamischanech al yodai v'lachter al toich katnusin u'muchiyoisai. Right? You can't instruct. Everybody understands that you can't instruct a 5-year-old using language that would be appropriate for a 20-year-old. Right? He's not going to understand you. Yet they think that it's okay to talk to different Talmidim who have completely different neshamas the same way. I'll tell him the same thing. I told him the same way my teacher told me, and I don't have to custom tailor anything. Until he reaches this nitzos, the spark inside of the neshama that's hidden, to bring it out, to make it sprout, and to make it grow. So there's a story. I don't know if you know the Tolna Rebbe in Israel. Well, just because we only have a couple minutes. So, Tolna Rebbe in Israel he's known as a big educator, and he's called in sometimes to consult. So there was a new school starting, and they were starting a children's school. It was like an elementary school, and so they asked him to help them hire a principal. They had 3 very qualified candidates. All 3 were more than qualified for the job, and they didn't know how to decide. The board of the school had no idea to decide, so they asked them to come in and consult and ask. So they gave him a whole list of questions that they had asked and the way that each of the candidates answered. And he said, "I'm not interested." He says, "I'd like to find a room with a window, and I'd like to watch each of the 3 candidates speak to a child from the school for 3 minutes. That's all. And then I'll tell you my decision." So they did it. The whole thing took 10 minutes. They had each kid in there for a couple of minutes, and they came in afterwards. They said, "You hire this guy. He's the right guy." So they said, "How did you didn't even hear him? You were between a window between you. You don't even know what he said to the child. How do you know?" So he said, "I'll tell you. It's very simple. The first one walked into the classroom, and he gave shalom to the child, and he spoke to him very nicely. It looked like he spoke. The kid was even smiling. The second one came in and bent over a little bit to the child. It was already a little improvement. The third one came in and sat down on the floor with the child to talk to him eye to eye level to eye. So that's, I don't know about all the other qualifications. You tell me they're all qualified, that's fine. That's what you want in a principal. Somebody who's going to understand where the child is at, to bring himself down, not try to lift the child up to his level, but bring himself down, understand what the child is going through, understand what he's dealing with, and that's how he's going to do his chinuch. So the truth is, everybody's had teachers, right? So we remember there were certain teachers that might have been very intelligent, very smart, very sophisticated, but we went through a whole year with them and we didn't really feel any kind of connection. And then there were others who may not have been such gedolim, but there are some rebbeim that you remember from when you were a kid, because that was the one who took a little interest in you, who connected to you a little bit, because that's what it takes to open up the neshama. It has to be the neshama that you're trying to open up that you're connecting to. It can't be some elevated neshama that's just sitting there and giving down to you and expecting you to then figure it out on your own. So he says, B'chevon, and therefore we'll just finish with this paragraph. B'chevon shekain, since it's that way, loy b'chol hanorm shavu hachinuch. Chinuch is not the same from child to child. It changes from child to child. Tolihu b'chol nar v'nar kifi tivoy. It changes with the different nature of a child. You know what? This child may not do well learning Gemara Rashi Tosfos. It might not work for him. He might need to have a more diverse schedule. He can't sit for 4 hours learning Be'iyun. He might need something else that talks to his nature. Daitoi midoisav, his mind, his midos, v'oisam ala mechanech lahakir. And it's incumbent upon the mechanech, whether it's a father or a rebbe or a teacher, to recognize these things. It's not enough if the mechanech just knows his own nature, just knows what he likes, what he does. He can't work only on his own neshama. He'll command and he'll instruct. He has to grasp the child's mindset and the child's potential. He has to work with that. What might work for child A doesn't work for child B. There might be children who it's okay. You could put them in front of a Gemara, leave them there for 6 hours, and come back and check on them. And for certain children, that'll be perfect. But for others, that doesn't work. For other kids, need something else. People have different natures, different desires, different characteristics. And that's what Shlomo Melech was telling us. Each child has its own path. Every child has its own path. The idea, I don't know if the Rebbe saw ever like a modern day curriculum, but I imagine he wouldn't have been too fond of it. I think he would be okay with the fact that there was a structure, but when we stick strictly to the curriculum and we're not willing to make adjustments for different children, I think the Rebbe would have been very, very against that. We'll see more. He develops this a lot more, but that's it for today. Shkoyach.